We are unloaded and clear. This is a Glock 22. It is not a Ruger 1022. It is not a Glock 19. It is not a, what were the other ones? An AR-15, and it is not a Mossberg 590. I know this comes as a huge shock to half of you from yesterday's Reddit comment thread and the entirety of K. What are we talking about? Tonight we're talking about trigger control. Trigger control is an important consideration for marksmanship. The goal of all marksmanship activities is, of course, to keep the sights aligned and on target as we fire the shot. Trigger control helps us with this by limiting the influence of the trigger finger and the other muscles of the trigger hand over the alignment of the sights and the firearm to guarantee that we're able to get good hits. Now this is, I like to write because when I write things down I can correct my mistakes on the fly. Unfortunately, this isn't really a topic that is amenable to a textual description. Furthermore, a lot of you have illustrated atrocious reading comprehension, and therefore I hope that by doing this tedious and error-ridden video that you'll be able to understand my meaning more clearly, and we'll be able to have a more productive discussion of this particular skill of marksmanship. All right, so with that, let's demonstrate. Let's clear it again, just for the hell of it. And we're still clear. And we squeeze the trigger. All right, so there are a few important considerations here. Obviously, I have to work the slide in between, and so I can't get a good grip and be checking my sight alignment. The important considerations are as follows. In the first place, I am not jerking the trigger back. I am not pulling the trigger. I like the term actuate. I actuate the trigger. Some people like to say that they press the trigger back or that they roll the trigger back smoothly or what have you. In any case, the purpose of the vocabulary is to illustrate that this is not a violent motion and that we are, in fact, moving gradually. This gradual movement becomes very fast, almost imperceptibly fast with practice, but in no case does it become jerky or violent. So this smooth motion that we're making, we're going to use the distal pad. We're going to use the distal pad of the trigger finger here. All right. As you practice more and more, you will find that you have a greater and greater tendency to move the trigger further and further this way. You drive the trigger finger further through the trigger guard. You might even get to the point where you're pulling the trigger with this crease here. That's okay as long as you're still getting good hits. There's nothing wrong with that. But when you first begin practicing, you shouldn't consciously try to do that. You should, if you're being conscious about it, you try to keep the trigger out here. That does a couple of things for us. In the first place, it provides us the best leverage and mechanical advantage. All right. In the second place, your sensitivity is best right here. So you're able to feel what's going on with that trigger more clearly. All right. The next thing that we're doing is riding the reset. Okay. Now, what I say when I say riding the reset is that we are allowing that disconnector. We're just barely allowing that disconnector to reset before we begin to squeeze the trigger again. The reason that we do this. This serves a couple of purposes. The first thing that it does for us is that it reduces the motion that the trigger finger has to make on its own, right? So if I'm doing this guy out here, there's a much greater tendency for that to be a much more violent motion and to disturb the alignment, right? In the second place, that shorter distance reduces the tendency for the sympathetic muscles to take over. And when I say sympathetic muscles, I'm not talking about the muscles up here for this guy. I'm talking about the muscles that drive these fingers here. Okay, so when I pull that trigger finger, I'm not trying to move this middle finger here. He just moves on his own, right? It's much more clear in the case of the pinky, right? You can't move the pinky across to the pad of the thumb without moving that ring finger. It's just not going to happen. So the same thing happens to a smaller extent with the trigger finger, and that will have a tendency to disturb the alignment of the pistol. So by riding that reset, I reduce the tendency to violently jerk the trigger back, and I reduce the influence of the sympathetic muscles over the alignment of the pistol. What are we doing? You can do this. You can do this. This is actually my dry fire exercise. This is my favorite thing to do. I sit there and I watch Netflix and do this. You could watch Burn Notice. You could watch Jack of All Trades. You could watch the Evil Dead series or the wonderful sci-fi film The Man with the Screaming Brain. Terminal Invasion and Alien Apocalypse are also good choices. But you just sit there and do this exercise. That does a couple of things for you. In the first place, it gets you familiar with the point at which your shot's going to break. You become more familiar with your trigger. The instinct is there for when you're on the range. In the second place, because this thing isn't going off and there's no recoil, there's no report, I will have a much smaller tendency to flinch. I am familiar with pulling the trigger as something that just results in a click rather than a bang. And that makes it much less likely that we're gonna flinch and throw the shot. It also helps to it wears all the bearing surfaces internally. So we're pulling that trigger. We're polishing the trigger against the hammer, or the strike, or the sear, which saves you the trouble of having to do the trigger job. The dry fire practice is in and of itself the trigger job. You can do this exercise with. It doesn't have to be a striker-fired auto-loading pistol. You can do this with a double-action pistol. It's easier because you just sit there and you just work the trigger and the hammer does its own thing. You can do it with an auto-loading rifle. You get slung up and get down and watch your TV. Pretend to be a sniper taking out the news anchor there. Don't actually do that. That's terrible. You can't really do it with a bolt gun, because you can't ride the reset. Your hand has to be working the bolt, so you can't be on the trigger. Dry fire is still important with a bolt gun, but it doesn't serve exactly the same purpose in this case. The counterpoint to that is that the trigger on the bolt gun is going to be really nice anyway, so it's not going to matter. Probably don't want to do this too much with shotguns. I'm never quite clear on which shotguns are safe to dry fire and which aren't, but you'll break them, some of them. Non-Ruger 22s are also a bad idea to dry fire, because you'll spall the firing pin up against the side of the chamber. It's terrible. Alright, so I think I covered everything that I wanted to mention there. Please feel free to bitch at me as much as you would like, because I neglected to mention your favorite pistol, or some edge case that exists in the Amazon rainforest, or the legality of firearms in your country. If you criticize me in a literate fashion, and if there are few enough of you, I might even respond to your comments. In any case, guys, stay safe out there, practice a lot, and have a wonderful day.